everyone, Helen Blunden here at Activate Learn on Twitter. It is time for another book review, and this time round it is a book I recently got out of the library, and it is Patrick Modiano. The book is called So You Don't Get Lost in the Neighborhood. Bit of a weird title of a book, but not worry about that. Now, one of the things I do when I visit my library is I pick out some different books. And when I say different is, you know how they're sitting in the bookshelf like this. Usually I look at the spine, and if the spine is very different to some other books in the general vicinity, I'll pick it out simply because it looks different and therefore might be a different author. Lo and behold, it was a different author. It was an author I've never heard of before, and in actual fact he is French. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature back in 2014, hence this little mark on the book. Because this stood out for me as being very different, a different publisher, hence a different author, I immediately took the book out because I'm always interested in reading different authors, especially authors who come from a non-Anglo-Saxon background, simply because they give different ideas, different views, knowing also that the book would have been written in its original language of French, and maybe sometimes it gets lost in the translation into English, but I'll talk about that a bit later on. What is So You Don't Get Lost in the Neighborhood about? It is about a writer or a recluse by the name of Jean d'Aragon, and he's in Paris in his apartment in September, and it's very hot and warm, and he doesn't want to know anyone, he doesn't want to speak to anyone. But he gets this phone call out of the blue, and he answers the phone, and on the phone is a guy by the name of Gilles Ottolini, who wants to meet with this author at a nearby cafe to give him his address book. He found the author's address book, and while he was going through the address book, he noticed a name by the name of Guy Torstel, who Ottolini knew, and he wanted to find out more information. And so he was adamant that he wanted to give the address book back and find out more about Guy Torstel. But Jean d'Aragon was someone who kind of kept to himself, and he really couldn't care less about his address book, and he certainly couldn't remember some of the names. But as the names kept coming up and propping, it would trigger some kind of repressed memory in him. And at times I felt that we don't know whether some of it was he was dreaming and some of it was real. Anyway, he goes and meets Ottolini, and Ottolini comes with his kind of very young assistant by the name of Chantal. And there's a story there that Chantal then also meets up later on with the author, saying that, you know, don't let Ottolini know what I'm doing and meeting with you because, you know, there's something there. So we kind of get snippets of these different relationships between Ottolini, the author, Chantal and the author, and both of them are giving them bits of information for Jean to go back through his childhood and think about a repressed memory that he's part of. Now, I won't talk about and won't give away anything about what that repressed memory is, but this entire book is all about confronting the memories of some kind of trauma that happened in his childhood, and how he goes back to the house and goes back to find the people who were part of that childhood situation, and he draws out the story piece by piece. Now, reading through some of the reviews of some people who have read his books previously, it seems that he writes a lot about repressed memories. At times when I was reading this book, I didn't know whether bits of it was realistic or reality based on his real life, or whether it was part of the story or whether it was made up. There were times where the author didn't know himself whether the phone had actually rang or whether he had dreamt it ringing, if that makes sense, or whether he had dreamt meeting Ottolini, or whether he had dreamt meeting Chantal. So there were elements of the book that it was very dreamlike, and you wanted to find out what the truth was and what this situation was all about. Kind of reminded me, and it came out to the point, there was a part in this book where as a kid he recounts the fact that he's on a train and he was worried about his suitcases being left in part of the train, that they might get stolen by someone on the train that he didn't know, and that this repressed memory keeps coming up in his dreams as an adult. And I thought to myself, that is so true. There are many times in my life that I sit and think about kind of some of the memories that I've repressed in the past, some of the fears that I've had, and they come out in dreams over the years, and it's always the same dream. And if I could pick it through a certain thing that happened in my past or in my younger years, it would always be the same aspect. Okay, so it's kind of like that feeling. It's pretty hard to explain. But the other thing I also mentioned was this book was written in French and it was translated into English by Ewan Cameron. And when I read some of the reviews online from the French readers, they would wax lyrical about the writing in this book and how wonderful it is. But I think to, say, an English reader like myself, when I read this book, somehow it gets lost in translation in bits. So I don't see the wowness factor. And unfortunately, maybe this is a book that I need to kind of read in French to get that wow factor, to kind of get lost in it myself, because once you translate it into English, somehow something gets lost. I have been learning French now for the last couple of years, and I looked online to find more about Patrick Modiano. A lot of his interviews are in French, but there is, if you're interested and if you can understand French, there is a really short, nice introductory speech by him as he presents his thank you speech for the Nobel Prize. But there's also another 5-minute video where a reporter asks him about the way he writes and the different process of his writing, which is also very interesting. Don't know what else to say about Patrick Modiano. If you're keen to kind of find out any videos about him, unfortunately the stuff that I've found is all in French and very limited as well. I had to kind of put the French generated subtitles to try and glean what was being said. But read some reviews as well about the books. But I thought for a first book it was interesting. I have got Villa Tristesse as a second book of his to read. I'm looking forward to it. So that is my review for now. Patrick Modiano, So You Don't Get Lost in the Neighborhood. If you have read his book, any French speakers out there, please let me know what his books are like in your language and how you find them. I have been reading some of the French reviews. It's been interesting, but unfortunately into English a little bit gets lost in translation, but not to worry, I will still be reading his books. Okay then, thank you for listening and thank you for watching. Bye for now.